The year is 1885. The location is London. It is November, and the fog outside is not merely mist. It is a living, breathing entity, a pea souper that presses against the glass of your bedroom window, thick with the acrid taste of coal smoke and the damp exhaled by 2.5 million souls. You wake in darkness. It is not the comfortable, ambient darkness of the modern world, broken by the standby lights of televisions or the glow of a street lamp. This is a profound, suffocating blackness. The fire in the grate has long since died down to a pile of gray ash, offering no warmth, only the memory of it. The air in the room is biting. It gnaws at the tip of your nose and the exposed skin of your ears. You can see your breath plume before you, a ghostly vapor in the moonlight that struggles to pierce the smog. You shift beneath the weight of the blankets, heavy wool, scratchy and dense, layered over linen sheets that felt like ice when you first climbed between them hours ago. The silence of the house is absolute, save for the settling of old timber, the groan of a floorboard, and the distant, rhythmic ticking of a clock in the hallway. You reach out your hand to the side. In the world we know today, you might expect to brush against the warmth of another sleeping body, a shoulder, a back, the slow rise and fall of a spouse's chest. But here, in this high-ceilinged Victorian bedroom, your hand meets only empty space, cold sheets, a void. You are married. You have been for years, yet you are alone. You turn your head and look across the dimly lit expanse of the room. There, separated from you by a distinct, deliberate gap of several feet, is another bed. It is identical to yours, iron-framed perhaps, or heavy mahogany, and in it sleeps your husband. He is close enough to hear if you were to cough, close enough to speak to in a whisper, yet he is in his own island of sleep. To the modern mind, this separation suggests a coldness of the heart. We look at this scene, two twin beds separated by a nightstand with a ceramic pitcher and basin, and we see a failing marriage. We see distance. We see a lack of intimacy. But you, living in this moment, see something entirely different. You do not see a lack of love. You see the height of modernity. You see privilege. You see health. You see survival. Tonight, we are going to drift back into the shadows of the 19th century. We are going to lie down in the separate beds of the Victorian-Era. We will pull the heavy covers up to our chins and listen to the wind rattle the sash windows. We will explore why, for nearly a century, the most loving thing a husband and wife could do for one another was to sleep apart. We will breathe in the fear of the night air. We will walk the gaslit streets where the great stink rises from the Thames. We will read the medical journals that warned that sleeping together could drain your very life force. We will look at the laws that made a woman the property of her husband and ask if the separate bed was the only piece of territory she could truly call her own. Close your eyes. Let the modern world dissolve. The electric hum of your appliances is fading. The blue light of your screens is extinguishing. There is only the ticking clock. There is only the fog. There is only the history of how we sleep. Before we descend further into the fog-choked streets of 19th century London, take a moment to settle yourself. Adjust your pillow. Pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. Ensure that you are warm, that you are safe, and that the air around you is still. If you enjoy these journeys into the quieter, darker corners of history, if you find comfort in the stories of how our ancestors lived, slept, and dreamed, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Like this video to help us reach other restless souls seeking solace in the past, and leave a comment below. Do you sleep better alone, or does the solitude of a separate bed fill you with dread? Tonight, our destination is the Victorian bedroom. It is a place of profound contradictions. It is a sanctuary of rest, yet it is also a battleground of science, superstition, and social anxiety. We are going to explore why millions of women, particularly in the rising middle classes of England and America, began to abandon the shared marital bed in favor of the solitary twin. Was it prudery? Was it a lack of passion? Or was it something far more pragmatic, a desperate attempt to survive in a world where the air itself was considered a weapon? Let us drift back. The gas lamps are flickering. The carriages are clattering over the cobblestones. The year is turning, and the world is changing. Let us step inside. To understand the bedroom, we must first understand the city that surrounds it. The London of the mid to late 19th century was not merely a city, it was a phenomenon,
a sprawling, heaving leviathan that had no equal in human history. Between 1800 and 1850, the population of London had
then doubled, exploding from 1 million to nearly 2.5 million people. By the time our story fully takes shape in the 1880s, that number had swelled to over 4.5 million. It was the largest city the world had ever seen. Imagine the sheer density of life. Row upon row of brick terraced houses stretching into the horizon, devouring the green fields of the home counties. The sky above this metropolis was not blue, nor was it gray. It was yellow, a permanent sulfurous bruise caused by the millions of coal fires burning in millions of grates, just like the one in your imaginary bedroom. This coal smoke mixed with the natural river fog of the Thames Valley to create smog, a word that would eventually be coined to describe this unique, choking atmosphere. If you were to open your window in 1860 or 1870, what would you smell? You would smell the coal, certainly, a sharp, metallic tang at the back of the throat. But beneath that, you would smell something more organic, more visceral. You would smell the city itself. Thousands of horses worked the streets of London every day, pulling omnibuses, hansoms, delivery carts, and private carriages. Each of these animals produced pounds of manure daily. In dry weather, this manure dried into a fine dust that coated every surface, every railing, every window ledge. In wet weather, and London is often wet, it turned the streets into a slurry of mud and filth that clung to the hems of long Victorian skirts and the leather of boots. And then there was the river, the Thames, the artery of the empire. For centuries, the Thames had been both the source of London's water and the destination for its waste. But as the population boomed, the river reached a breaking point. In the summer of 1858, an event occurred that would sear itself into the olfactory memory of the nation: the Great Stink. The summer was unusually hot. Day after day, the sun beat down on the sluggish brown water. The flushing toilet, a relatively new invention among the wealthy, had exacerbated the problem. Instead of waste sitting in cesspits to be collected by night soilmen, it was now flushed directly into the drains, which emptied straight into the river. The Thames effectively became an open sewer. The stench was biblical. It was so overpowering that it disrupted the business of the most powerful empire on earth. In the House of Commons, which sits directly on the riverbank, curtains were soaked in chloride of lime in a desperate attempt to mask the smell. It didn't work. Members of Parliament were seen running from committee rooms, retching, handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. The situation was so dire that there was serious talk of moving the government to Oxford or St. Albans. This was not just a matter of unpleasantness. In the Victorian mind, this smell was death itself. We will discuss the Miasma Theory in greater detail later, but know this: when a Victorian smelled a bad smell, they did not just register disgust, they registered danger. They believed that the smell was the disease. To breathe in the stench of the Thames was to breathe in cholera, typhoid, and fever. It was this terror that finally spurred action. In a record 18 days, Parliament passed a bill to fund a massive new sewage system. The great engineer Joseph Bazalgette was commissioned to build it. From 1859 to 1875, he oversaw the construction of 85 miles of intercepting sewers, massive brick tunnels that ran parallel to the river, capturing the waste before it could enter the Thames and whisking it away eastwards. It was a masterpiece of engineering that still serves London today. But for the decades of its construction, the city was a building site, a place of open earth and exposed drains. This was the world outside the bedroom window, crowded, smelly, chaotic, and dangerous. Inside the home, life was strictly stratified by class. If you were wealthy, an aristocrat, or a successful industrialist, your home was a fortress of comfort. You lived in a detached villa or a townhouse in a square like Belgravia or Kensington. You had servants to carry the coal, to heat the water for your hip bath, to empty the chamber pots before you even woke. Your bedroom was massive, airy, and high-ceilinged. If you were middle class, a clerk, a shopkeeper, a teacher, you lived in the suburbs that were sprawling out along the new railway lines. You lived in a semi-detached house or a respectable terrace. You likely had one servant, perhaps a maid-of-all-work, a young girl of 14 or 15 who was paid a pittance to scrub your steps and light your fires. Your bedroom was smaller, but it was private. You aspired to the standards of the wealthy. You read the advice manuals. You worried about appearances. But if you were working class, if you were a dock worker, a factory hand, a seamstress, you lived in the rookeries and slums of the East End. Here, the Victorian ideal of privacy was a cruel joke.
Entire families lived in this
single room. A mother, a father, 5 children, and perhaps a lodger might share a space no larger than a modern living room. They slept 3 or 4 to a bed. They cooked, ate, washed, and slept in the same stagnant air. In these rooms, the great stink was not a summer event, it was a daily reality. Cesspits in the backyards overflowed. Water came from a shared pump in the courtyard, a pump that might be contaminated by the very cesspit next to it. It was in these crowded, impoverished districts that disease ran rampant. Cholera epidemics swept through London in 1831, 1848, 1854, and 1866. Each time it killed thousands. It was a terrifying disease, one that could kill a healthy person within hours of the first symptom. In 1854, a physician named John Snow famously identified the Broad Street pump in Soho as the source of a local cholera outbreak. He removed the handle of the pump, and the cases stopped. Snow argued that cholera was waterborne, caused by tiny, invisible particles, but the medical establishment mocked him. They clung to the old belief, miasma, bad air. This is the central paradox of the Victorian age. It was an age of industrial might, of steam engines and telegraphs, of global empire. Yet medically, it was an age of profound ignorance and fear. They built bridges that spanned rivers, yet they did not know what caused the fever that killed their children. They were terrified of the air. They were terrified of the water. They were terrified of the very breath of their neighbors. And so, the home became a fortress, the bedroom became a bunker, and the bed itself, the place where we are most vulnerable, where we spend 1/3 of our lives, became a site of intense medical scrutiny. Imagine living with this low-level, constant hum of anxiety. Every time you smell a drain, you fear for your life. Every time a fog descends, you worry about your lungs. Every time your spouse coughs in the night, a cold dread settles in your stomach. Is it any wonder then that they began to look at this shared double bed not as a nest of comfort, but as a trap? Is it any wonder that the advice manuals began to whisper a new word, a word that promised safety, hygiene, and health? Separation. But before we follow that word into the bedroom, let us spend a little longer in the world that surrounded it. Let us look more carefully at the domestic arrangements of the Victorian home. Because the bedroom did not exist in isolation, it was the innermost chamber of a highly structured, deeply anxious household. A middle-class Victorian family in 1870s London would live in a terraced house of 4 or 5 floors. The ground floor held the parlor, the public face of the home, where guests were received and the family performed its social role. The wallpaper was dark, flocked, heavily patterned. The furniture was dense, ottomans, whatnots, framed portraits, a piano, dried flowers under glass domes. The mantelpiece was laden with objects. Every surface spoke of aspiration. Behind the parlor was the dining room, and behind that the kitchen, often in the basement. In these cramped, low-ceilinged kitchens, a single servant, a maid of all work, might toil from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. She would black-lead the kitchen range before the family rose, lay and light the parlor fire, carry coal scuttles up 3 flights of narrow stairs, boil water for morning ablutions, prepare breakfast, scrub the front steps on hands and knees, and then begin on lunch. She earned perhaps 12 to 16 pounds a year. She ate her meals alone in the kitchen after the family had finished. She slept alone in a tiny attic room. In the 1860s and 70s, a rigid hierarchy of domestic service structured the larger households. A cook might earn 20 to 25 pounds a year, a lady's maid slightly more, a housemaid 12 to 15, a kitchen maid as little as 8 pounds. These women gave their entire waking lives to the maintenance of the household above them, heating the water, changing the sheets, emptying the chamber pots. For the chamber pot was ubiquitous. There was no indoor plumbing in the vast majority of Victorian homes until the end of the century. If you needed to urinate in the night, you used the pot under the bed. The washstand beside your bed held a ceramic basin and jug, cold water for washing your face and hands before rising. The night soilmen came in the small hours before dawn to empty the cesspits at the rear of the houses. Imagine the sound, the clank of metal pails, the low voices of the men, the sloshing of waste being hauled away on carts through sleeping streets.
Without them, London would have drowned in its own waste within weeks. It was one of the most essential jobs in the city, and one of the most invisible. The introduction of the flushing water closet was meant to be an improvement. By the 1870s, wealthier homes were being fitted with indoor WCs. But before Bazalgette sewers were completed in 1875,
these flushing toilets simply emptied their waste into the existing drains, which ran into the Thames. The improvement made the river worse. The very people who thought they were modernizing the city were accelerating its contamination. So the Victorians lived in a world where the boundaries between the body and the environment were dangerously porous. Their waste was in their streets, in their river, in their drinking water. Their air was thick with the exhalations of millions of coal fires and millions of human beings. Disease moved through this environment with terrifying speed. You must understand what cholera looked like up close. It arrived without warning, often in the middle of the night. Intense stomach cramps, violent, uncontrollable diarrhea, the characteristic rice water stools that were in fact the intestinal lining dissolving, then vomiting, the body losing fluids at a catastrophic rate, the skin turning gray, the eyes sinking into their sockets, the hands wrinkled as though the person had aged 40 years in a few hours. A healthy adult could be dead within 18 hours of the first symptom. The Victorian family that went to bed in good health on a Thursday night might have 2 dead by Saturday morning. Against this backdrop, the desire to control one's sleeping environment, to manage the air, the space, the proximity of other breathing bodies, was not a fad or a vanity. It was a desperate, entirely rational attempt to survive. To understand how radical the twin bed was, we must look back at what came before it. For the vast majority of human history, sleeping alone was not a luxury, it was a vulnerability. It was weird. It was dangerous. Archaeologists have found the earliest evidence of beds in South Africa, dating back 77,000 years. These were not raised frames, of course, but hollows dug into the cave floor, lined with layers of sedge grass and aromatic leaves. Interestingly, these leaves, like the river mint, were chosen specifically because they repelled insects. Even then, 77,000 years ago, the sleeper was fighting a battle for a peaceful night, trying to create a zone of safety. But these hollows were not for individuals, they were for groups. Humans slept in piles, we slept in heaps. Fast forward to ancient Egypt, around 3000 BC. Here we see the first recognizable beds, raised wooden frames with woven lashings. The Egyptians raised their beds for a very practical reason, to get off the floor, away from snakes, scorpions, and the cold draft. But even here, the bed was often a shared space for the family unit. Throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe, the great bed was the center of the household. It was the most expensive piece of furniture a family owned. A good bed with its feathers, its wool, its heavy curtains was worth more than the cottage it stood in. It was often bequeathed in wills, passed down from generation to generation like a crown jewel. Consider the famous Great Bed of Ware. Built around 1590, this bed is a monstrosity of oak, over 10 feet wide. It is currently in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and when you stand before it, you are struck by its sheer communal scale. It was built for an inn, a curiosity to attract travelers. A legend from 1689 claims that it once held 52 people, 26 butchers and their wives. While likely an exaggeration, the fact that such a story existed tells us something about the pre-modern attitude towards sleep. It was communal, it was crowded. In the 17th century, the diarist Samuel Pepys, a man of some status and wealth, frequently wrote about sharing a bed with his male friends or servants when traveling or when guests stayed over. There was no sexual connotation to this, it was simply practical. You shared a bed to share warmth. You shared a bed because there was only one bed. Pepys would even rate his bedfellows on their conversation skills or whether they snored. Even as late as 1776, the concept of the private bed was not absolute. Two of the most famous men in American history, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, were forced to share a bed at an inn in New Brunswick, New Jersey, during their journey to negotiate with the British. The room was small, the bed was narrow, and they had a famous argument. Adams, a hypochondriac terrified of the night air, wanted the windows shut tight. Franklin, a believer in fresh air, a man ahead of his time, wanted it open. Adams eventually surrendered, writing later that Franklin began a harangue upon the cause of colds and lying with the window open. I was so amused that I soon fell asleep. So for centuries, the shared bed was the norm. It was practical, it was warm, it was human.
But then came the Victorians. The 19th century brought the Industrial Revolution, and with it a new kind of housing and a new kind of morality. As the middle class grew, they moved into row houses with specific rooms for specific purposes. The medieval hall, where everyone ate, slept in.
Lived was gone. Now there was a parlor for guests, a kitchen for cooking, a nursery for children, and a bedroom for the parents. Simultaneously, a wave of evangelical Christianity swept through England in the 1830s. This religious revival placed a massive emphasis on the sanctity of the nuclear family. The home was a temple, the wife was the angel in the house, and the bedroom was the holy of holies. This moral shift changed who was allowed in the bed. Strangers? Absolutely not. Friends? No longer appropriate. Servants? Unthinkable. The bed became the exclusive domain of the married couple. In 1875, Architect magazine published a stern declaration that summarized this new mood. They declared that a bedroom used for anything other than sleeping was unwholesome and immoral. The bedroom was to be a place of unconsciousness, of purity. It was not a place for reading, for working, for socializing. It was a vault for the sleeping body. Jane Ellen Panton, the Martha Stewart of the 1880s, wrote a massively influential book called From Kitchen to Garret in 1888. It was the Bible for the young Victorian bride setting up her first home. Panton had very specific ideas about the bedroom. She railed against the dark, heavy tapestries of the past. She wanted light. She wanted air. She recommended bright, cheerful colors. She insisted on a washstand for cleanliness. She advised that chamber pots be discreetly hidden in mahogany cupboards. And significantly, she recommended that every wife have a long chair, a chaise longue, at the foot of the bed. Why? So the wife could rest during the day without getting into the bed itself. Panton recognized the exhaustion of the Victorian woman, worn down by childbearing and household management. The bedroom was her recovery ward. For the very wealthy, this desire for privacy had always been satisfied by separate bedrooms. In the great country houses, the master and the mistress had separate suites, often connected by a discreet door. This allowed them to visit each other for intimacy, but retreat to their own domains for sleep. It was the ultimate luxury, autonomy. But the middle class, the lawyers, the doctors, the merchants, could not afford separate suites. They had one master bedroom. How could they achieve that aristocratic separation? How could they maintain that hygiene and dignity within four walls? The answer arrived in the furniture catalogs of the late 19th century. It was made of iron. It was painted white. It was hygienic. It was modern. It was the twin bed. But to truly appreciate what the twin bed represented, what it displaced, and what it embodied, we must linger for a moment in the world of medieval and early modern sleeping arrangements and trace the slow, grinding transformation that eventually landed us in the Victorian bedroom. In medieval England, the great hall of a manor house was exactly that, a great hall, a single vast room in which the lord, his family, his retainers, his servants, and sometimes his animals all sheltered under one roof. At night, the trestle tables were pulled aside, straw was spread on the floor, and everyone lay down together, ranked more or less by status, the lord closest to the fire, the servants at the cold periphery. Sleep was not a private act, it was a communal one. The wealthy, over centuries, gradually began to separate themselves. The solar, an upper room, became the lord's private chamber, but even this was not truly private by modern standards. The lord's groom of the stool slept in the same room. Servants dozed in the doorway. The bed itself in a great household was a piece of state furniture. The ceremonial bedding of a royal couple, the public act of the bride and groom being escorted to the wedding bed and the curtains drawn, was a ritual that persisted in English royal households until the 17th century. The stained sheets were sometimes displayed as proof of consummation. In the 16th century poet Andrew Buckley complained of bedfellows at the inn who buck and babble, some cometh drunk to bed. This was the common reality of any traveler in pre-modern Europe. You shared, you bundled, you endured. Even in the early modern period, the concept of separate beds for husband and wife would have struck most people as eccentric, if not downright suspicious. Warmth was precious, beds were expensive. You shared your bed as you shared everything else, out of necessity and without embarrassment. What changed? The Industrial Revolution changed it, not merely by creating new wealth, but by creating new spaces and new ideas about what those spaces meant. The row houses being built by thousands in the expanding suburbs of London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool were architecturally distinct from anything that had come before.
They had corridors, they had rooms that connected to other rooms only through doorways with actual doors, doors that could be closed and locked. The corridor was a revolutionary architectural
invention. Before the corridor, you passed through one room to reach another. The servant's path to their garret led through the dining room. A guest room was accessed through the library. Privacy was structurally impossible. The corridor changed this. Each room now had its own entry point, its own small sovereignty. And with the physical architecture of privacy came the philosophical architecture. The Victorians developed a near-religious reverence for the idea of the private self. The domestic ideology of separate spheres, the man's world being the workplace and the public arena, the woman's world being the home, intensified the importance of the home as a refuge. The bedroom was the innermost sanctum of this refuge. It was the most private room in the most private building in a person's life. Given all of this, the new architecture, the new morality, the new hygiene anxieties, it is perhaps inevitable that the Victorian middle class eventually came to regard the twin bed not as an eccentric luxury, but as the natural and obvious arrangement. Two separate people, two separate lives, two separate beds. And the furniture makers of the era were ready to meet the demand. By the 1880s, the iron bedstead was becoming the dominant form. Iron was promoted over wood on grounds of hygiene. It didn't absorb bugs, it could be scrubbed down, it didn't rot. The white painted iron twin bed became a symbol of the sanitary age. It was visible proof that you had read the manuals, that you understood science, that you took your health and the health of your household seriously. The transition to twin beds was not merely a matter of fashion, it was a medical crusade. To the Victorian doctor, the double bed was a health hazard, it was a petri dish, it was a trap. In the mid-19th century, a flurry of medical literature began to appear, warning the public of the dire consequences of sleeping two to a mattress. Leading the charge was Dr. William Whitty Hall. In 1861, he published a treatise with the formidable title, Sleep, or the Hygiene of the Night. Dr. Hall was not interested in romance, he was interested in survival. He viewed sleep as a critical biological process that was easily disrupted by the presence of another human being. Dr. Hall's prescription was stark. He wrote, "Each sleeper should have a single bed in a large, clean, light room, so as to pass all the hours of sleep in pure, fresh air, and that those who fail in this will end in health and strength of limb and brain, and will die while yet their days are not all told." Let that sink in. Will die while yet their days are not all told. This was fear-mongering of the highest order. Dr. Hall was telling his readers that sharing a bed was a slow form of suicide. It would weaken your limbs, it would rot your brain, it would shorten your life. Why? What was so deadly about a spouse? Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson, another prominent sanitary reformer of the 1880s, picked up the torch. In a series of widely read articles, he declared war on the double bed. "I cannot do better," he wrote, "than commence what I have to say concerning beds and bedding by protesting against the double bed. The system of having beds in which two persons can sleep is always, to some extent, unhealthy." The medical logic was rooted in a concept called vitality or nerve force. Victorian physiology viewed the human body as a battery, charged with a finite amount of energy. During the day, you expended this energy. During sleep, you recharged. But this energy was unstable. It could leak, it could be stolen. Victorian doctors genuinely believed in a form of biological vampirism. They taught that a stronger sleeper, usually the husband or the older person, would naturally drain the vitality of the weaker sleeper, usually the wife or the younger person. In 1858, Dr. James Copland issued a specific warning regarding young females married to very old men. He argued that these young women would lose their bloom, their health, and their life force if they slept in the same bed as their elderly husbands. The husbands, conversely, would benefit. Copland noted with a shudder that elderly men consider the indulgence favorable to longevity. They were feeding on their wives. They were inhaling their youth. This belief was supported by terrifying anecdotes that circulated in medical journals. One famous case involved a pale, sickly, and thin boy who had been forced to share a bed with his grandmother, a very aged person. The boy was wasting away, his doctors baffled. Finally, someone suggested the bed was the cause. When they were separated at night, the report claimed triumphantly, the recovery was rapid. Imagine being a young Victorian wife reading this. You look at your husband, 10 or 15 years your senior, snoring beside you. Is he just sleeping, or is he feeding? Is your fatigue in the morning just tiredness, or is it a symptom of vitality theft? This medicalization of the bed transformed it from a place of intimacy into a place of predation. The twin bed offered a solution. It created a physical gap, a firebreak across which the vitality could not jump. By the early 20th century, this idea had hardened into dogma. Dr. Edwin Bowers, writing in 1919 in his book Sleeping for Health, was absolute. Separate beds for every sleeper, he declared, are as necessary as are separate dishes for every eater. The analogy is telling. You wouldn't share a fork with your husband for every meal, would you? You wouldn't drink from the same cup? Then why would you share a mattress? It was unhygienic, it was undignified, it was biologically dangerous. The public listened. The Yorkshire Herald newspaper noted in 1892 that the twin bed seems to have come to stay and will no doubt in time succeed the double bed in all rooms occupied by 2 persons. The bedroom was no longer just a room, it was a medical space, and the woman who managed it was no longer just a wife. She was the matron of a private hospital, responsible for the nerve force and vital energy of her entire family. To choose twin beds was to choose science. To choose the double bed was to choose ignorance and death. Let us pause here and consider the broader context of Victorian medicine, because it is essential to understanding why people so readily believed the doctor's claims about the double bed. Victorian medicine was undergoing a revolution. The second half of the 19th century witnessed the birth of modern scientific medicine. Anesthesia had arrived in the 1840s, ether in 1846, chloroform in 1847, transforming surgery from a torture to be survived into a procedure with a chance of recovery. Louis Pasteur had demonstrated in the 1860s that fermentation and putrefaction were caused by microorganisms, laying the groundwork for germ theory. Joseph Lister, inspired by Pasteur's work, introduced antiseptic surgical technique in 1867, dramatically reducing post-operative mortality. The medical profession was riding a wave of genuine, hard-won authority. When a doctor spoke, people listened with a reverence we might today extend to a combination of scientist, priest, and judge. The advice manual and the medical pamphlet were consumed with hungry credulity. In this environment, the pronouncements of Dr. Hall and Dr. Richardson were not questioned. They were repeated, they were followed, they were built into the architecture of the middle-class home. The vitality theory deserves a little more of our attention because it was so deeply embedded in the Victorian understanding of the body. The concept had roots in 18th century nervous physiology. The body was understood to run on a finite reservoir of nerve force, or vital energy, a kind of electric fluid that animated the body and powered the brain. This fluid could be depleted by excess, by overwork, by overeating, by sexual excess, by emotional agitation, and, crucially, by being in close proximity to another person who was drawing on the same ambient vitality atmosphere. The idea was not entirely divorced from observation. People do feel tired after poor sleep. People do feel drained when co-sleeping with a restless partner. The Victorian doctors took these real experiences and built an elaborate, wrong, but internally consistent theoretical framework around them. And the gender dimension of the vitality theft theory is impossible to ignore. It was almost always framed as older or stronger, read male, draining younger or weaker, read female. This was not accidental. It reflected and reinforced the Victorian social hierarchy. The woman was by medical definition the depleted one, the weaker vessel, the one who needed protection, even if that protection meant protecting her from her own husband. There is an extraordinary irony in this. Victorian medical theory, which in most respects subordinated women, diagnosing their normal emotions as hysteria, recommending bed rest for independent thinking, confining them to the home in the name of their fragile constitutions, here in this one domain actively argued for their separation from their husbands. The very system that constrained them also, unintentionally, handed them a weapon. A woman who wanted her own bed could point to the medical literature and say, "It is the doctor's orders." She was not being difficult. She was not rejecting her husband. She was following the advice of the expert. In a world where women had almost no legal standing and no language to assert bodily autonomy, the language of Victorian medicine gave them, unintentionally, a small but real refuge. The advice manuals understood this dynamic. Jane Ellen Panton, in From Kitchen to Garret, wrote about the bedroom with a knowing tenderness that acknowledged the reality of exhausted Victorian womanhood. She recommended the long chair not merely for health reasons, but because a wife needed a place to rest during the day without disturbing.
The marital bed, and without having to explain herself to anyone. The bedroom was her domain. The arrangements within it were her jurisdiction. This is the hidden argument beneath the medical language. The twin bed was not just about germs.
It was about governance. It was about the woman's right to manage her own body, her own rest, her own recovery, even if that right had to be smuggled in under the cover of sanitary reform. If the doctors provided the theory of vitality theft, it was a nurse who provided the practical marching orders for the Victorian bedroom. Her name was Florence Nightingale. We know her as the Lady with the Lamp, the angel of the Crimea who tended to wounded soldiers. But when she returned to England in 1856, she became something else, the most powerful voice in public health in the British Empire. In 1860, she published Notes on Nursing. It was a small book, but its impact was seismic. It became an instant bestseller, found on the nightstand of almost every middle-class woman in England and America. Nightingale's book was not just for professional nurses. It was a manual for every woman who cared for a family, and her first, most fundamental rule was about air. The very first canon of nursing, she wrote in capital letters, is to keep the air he breathes as pure as the external air. Nightingale waged a ferocious war against the closed window. You must remember the context. The Miasma Theory had taught people to fear the outside air, to fear the smell of the city. People sealed their bedrooms like tombs to keep the bad air out. Nightingale told them they were killing themselves. Another extraordinary fallacy is the dread of night air, she wrote. What air can we breathe at night but night air? The choice between pure night air from without and foul night air from within. She argued that the most dangerous thing in a bedroom was the sleeper themselves. During sleep, she warned, the human body, even when in health, is far more injured by the influence of foul air than when awake. Bedrooms most universally foul was her damning diagnosis of the English home. Nightingale described a terrifying process. When you sleep, you exhale carbon dioxide, you sweat, your body releases effluvia, invisible vapors and odors. In a closed room, over the course of 8 hours, the air becomes saturated with this biological exhaust. You are rebreathing your own poison. Now add a second person to that bed. The poison doubles. If one person fills a room with effluvia in a night, 2 people make it twice as toxic. Sharing a bed meant your face was inches from another person's exhalations. You were breathing their waste air. You were inhaling their sweat vapors. This created a culture of obsessive bedroom management. The Victorian wife became a ventilation engineer. The window had to be open, top sash down, bottom sash up, to create a draft, but not too much draft or you might catch a chill. The chimney flue must be open to draw air up. The heavy velvet curtains, once symbols of wealth, were now seen as dust traps and air blockers. The washstand became a central altar in this ritual. Every morning, the body must be scrubbed to remove the night's toxins. The chamber pot must be emptied immediately, the slops removed from the room instantly, lest their fumes poison the air. In this context, the twin bed was the ultimate ventilation strategy. By separating the sleepers, you diluted the effluvia. You created a zone of fresh air around each head. You ensured that the husband was not breathing the wife's exhaust, and vice versa. Imagine the sensory reality of a shared Victorian bed in winter, in a poor household where the windows were never opened because coal was too expensive to waste. The smell of unwashed bodies. Remember, there were no showers and baths were a weekly luxury at best. The smell of wool damp with sweat. The smell of the chamber pot under the bed. The smell of stale breath. The smell of coal smoke seeping from the grate. To the disciple of Florence Nightingale, that smell was the smell of death. The twin bed offered a way out. It offered a clean, white, iron-framed island of purity in a sea of foul air. It was a breath of fresh air in a suffocating world. Before we move to the next great terror that drove Victorian couples apart, the specter of tuberculosis, let us linger a little longer with Florence Nightingale and the world she inhabited, because she was doing something far more radical than simply recommending open windows. Florence Nightingale was born in 1820 into a wealthy, well-connected family. She was given a name unusual for an English girl, named after the Italian city of Florence where she was born. She was educated far beyond the standard for women of her time, tutored in mathematics, Greek, Latin, French, German, Italian, philosophy, and science. Her parents expected her to marry well and live the life of an upper-class Victorian woman, managing a household,
raising children, visiting the poor in a ladylike and supervised manner. Florence had other plans. From a young age, she felt called to nursing, a calling her family found mortifying. In the 1840s, nursing was not a respected profession. Nurses were associated with gin-soaked incompetence, with the chaotic, filthy hospital wards where the poor went to die. The idea of a gentlewoman nursing the sick was scandalous. But Nightingale persisted. She trained, she studied, she visited hospitals across Europe. And in 1854, when Britain went to war in the Crimea against Russia, she was appointed superintendent of the female nursing establishment of the English General Hospitals in Turkey. She arrived at the Barrack Hospital at Scutari to find conditions that were beyond description. The wards were overcrowded beyond all reason. Men lay in their own filth. Rats ran over the sleeping soldiers. The latrines overflowed into the wards. The medical supplies were inadequate. The mortality rate was not from battle wounds, it was from disease, cholera, typhus, dysentery. Men who survived the battlefield were dying in the hospital at a rate that appalled even the hardened military establishment. Nightingale went to work. She organized the kitchens. She arranged for clean linen. She got the drains opened and the ventilation improved. She harassed the army bureaucracy into providing soap, clean water, and adequate food. Within 6 months, the mortality rate in her hospital had dropped from 42% to 2%. She did not know yet that cholera was waterborne and typhus was spread by lice. She still believed in a modified version of miasma theory, that the foul air of the hospital was the primary killer. But her instincts were right. Cleanliness, ventilation, and separation of the sick from accumulated waste were indeed the keys to survival. She arrived at the correct answers for partially incorrect reasons. When she returned to England in 1856, she was a national heroine. The lady with the lamp had saved the army, but she was not interested in fame. She was interested in changing how England treated its sick and its healthy. Notes on Nursing, published in 1860, was the instrument of this change. It cost £1, deliberately priced to be accessible to the working and middle classes. It sold out within weeks. It went through multiple editions. It was translated into foreign languages. For decades, it sat on the shelves of homes across the English-speaking world, a slim, authoritative volume that told women exactly how to manage the health of their households. Nightingale's prescriptions were practical and specific. She described how to arrange a sick room for maximum ventilation. She warned against the common practice of keeping the windows shut at night, against filling the room with heavy curtains and thick rugs. She demanded that chamber pots be emptied immediately after use, not left under the bed to exude their fumes all night. She insisted that no damp towels be dried in the bedroom. She condemned the habit of keeping flowers in the sick room overnight. They consumed oxygen. She also wrote with characteristic directness about the management of the healthy sleeper's room. The same principles applied. Fresh air was essential, foul air was dangerous, and the greatest source of foul air in a bedroom were the people sleeping in it. Consider the Victorian bedtime ritual as prescribed by Nightingale and her disciples. You would undress, removing the corset, a process that itself required help and considerable effort, the layers of petticoats, the stockings, the shoes. You would wash at the washstand, face, neck, hands, and in the more hygienically advanced households, more of the body. You would don your nightgown. If you were conscientious, you would open the window a crack before climbing into bed. But if you were sharing a bed, your nightgown now absorbed the exhalations of 2 people for the next 8 hours. Your hair, spread on the pillow, collected the moisture of 2 sets of breath. The mattress itself, in most Victorian homes, a thick, heavy construction of horsehair, wool, and batting, not easily removed or cleaned, slowly absorbed years of these nocturnal emanations. Florence Nightingale would have found this horrifying, and she said so, not directly about the marriage bed, but the implication was clear in every line of her chapter on bed and bedding. The bed must be aired daily, the bedclothes must be turned back, sunlight must reach the mattress when possible, and the fewer people sharing that mattress, the better. As the 19th century drew to a close, the vague fear of miasma gave way to a sharper, more specific, and infinitely more terrifying threat: germs, and specifically the germ of tuberculosis. They called it the White Plague. They called it consumption. It was the defining disease of the Victorian-Era. Between 1851 and 1910, it killed 4 million people in England and Wales alone. It was a reaper. That did not discriminate.
though it harvested the poor in far greater numbers. In the cultural imagination, TB was the romantic disease. It was associated with sensitivity, with genius, with beauty. We think of the poet John Keats coughing his life away in Rome. We think of the tragic heroine in the opera La Traviata. The symptoms, the pale skin, the bright, feverish eyes, the slender frame, became a perverse kind of beauty standard. But the reality was a gruesome, suffocating, bloody death. It was a slow drowning in one's own fluids. It involved violent coughing fits that brought up bright red arterial blood. It involved drenching night sweats that soaked the sheets. It involved a slow, wasting emaciation until the body was little more than a skeleton. For most of the century, doctors didn't know what caused it. Many thought it was hereditary. Some thought it was bad air. Then, in 1882, the German scientist Robert Koch made a discovery that changed the world. He identified Mycobacterium tuberculosis. He proved that TB was not a mood or a vapor or a curse. It was a bacteria. It was a germ. This discovery hit the Victorian bedroom like a bomb. Koch proved that the disease was spread through droplets, through coughing, spitting, sneezing, and breathing. Suddenly, the shared breath of the double bed wasn't just unhygienic or vitality draining, it was lethal. If your husband had a hacking cough, sleeping next to him was a death sentence. If your wife was pale and feverish, kissing her goodnight was a game of Russian roulette. The germ theory supercharged the argument for separate beds. Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson's warnings from the 1880s gained a renewed, terrifying urgency. The twin bed became a quarantine measure. Before antibiotics, which wouldn't arrive until the 1940s, the only treatment for TB was the sanitarium cure. The prescription was simple: rest, food, and air. Immense amounts of fresh, cold, moving air. In 1884, Dr. Edward Trudeau opened the first public TB sanitarium in America at Saranac Lake, New York. Trudeau was a consumptive himself. He noticed that he felt better when he was hunting in the Adirondack Mountains, breathing the pine-scented air. He built a facility based on this principle. His famous Little Red Cottage was a tiny one-room structure with a porch. The treatment involved patients sleeping outside, on porches, or in rooms with windows that were never closed, even in the depths of winter. Patients were wrapped in furs, wools, and blankets with hot soapstones at their feet. They lay in wicker chairs, breathing in the freezing air to cleanse and harden their lungs. This sleeping porch phenomenon spread from the hospital to the home. Architects began adding sleeping porches to middle-class houses. The domestic bedroom was remodeled to mimic the sanitarium. The advice was clear: keep the windows open at all costs, strip the room of carpets and heavy drapes that might harbor dust and germs, and above all, separate the sleepers. Imagine the moment a Victorian wife hears the telltale cough from her husband's side of the bed. It is a dry, persistent hack. She sees the handkerchief come away spotted with red. The fear that grips her heart is absolute. The doctor arrives. He listens to the chest. He gives the diagnosis. And then he gives the domestic prescription. He must sleep alone, madam. You must move to another room. If you cannot, you must get separate beds. You must not breathe his air. Was there grief in that separation? Certainly. But was there also relief? By 1900, the rule, don't share a bed with anyone who coughs, was common knowledge. The twin bed became the furniture of survival. It was a barrier against the White Plague. But here again, we see the cruelty of class. TB devastated the poor. In the tenements of London and New York, where separation was impossible, where 3 children slept in one bed and the parents in another in the same room, the disease tore through families like wildfire. The luxury of not dying of TB was directly linked to the luxury of the separate bed. Let us sit with tuberculosis a little longer, because this disease shaped the Victorian imagination and the Victorian bedroom in ways that are difficult to overstate. By the middle of the 19th century, TB was so prevalent that there was scarcely a family in England that had not been touched by it. It was not an exotic illness, not a plague that came from outside. It lived in your street, it lived in your house. It was the cough that had been there so long that people stopped noticing it, until the first hemoptysis, the first coughing of blood, and then the terrible recognition. The Bronte family of Haworth, West Yorkshire, provides one of the most poignant examples. The parsonage sat in a village above a churchyard, its water supply contaminated by the burial pond. The Bronte children, all remarkable, all talented, all achingly aware of death, fell one by one. Maria Bronte died in 1825, aged 11. Elizabeth Bronte died weeks later, aged 10. Branwell Bronte died in 1848. Emily Bronte died in December 1848, at 30 years old, having refused all medical attention, famously sewing until hours before her death. Anne Bronte died in May 1849, at 29. Charlotte Bronte, who had watched all her siblings consumed, survived until 1855, dying at 38, possibly of typhoid fever compounded by the physical toll of the preceding decades of grief. The Brontes are exceptional in their literary genius, but not in their experience of tuberculosis. Every Victorian household knew the sequence: the cough that didn't clear, the slow weight loss, the afternoon fevers, the night sweats, the brightening of the eyes, that cruel beauty, and then the blood. It was this lived reality that made Robert Koch's 1882 announcement so devastating. People had sensed that proximity to the ill was dangerous. They had noticed, empirically, that TB seemed to run in families. They had used various superstitions and folk remedies to try to protect themselves. But now there was a name for the mechanism. Now there was a fact. Every breath your sick husband exhaled contained millions of the organisms that might kill you. The anti-spitting campaigns that swept Britain and America in the 1880s and 1890s were a direct response to this knowledge. Spitting in public was made a finable offense in many jurisdictions. Signs went up in omnibuses, in railway stations, in shops. Do not spit. The logic was simple. A consumptive sputum dried on the floor could be aerosolized into dust, inhaled, and infect anyone who passed through the space. Now think about what this meant for the shared bed. A consumptive spouse didn't just cough occasionally, they coughed chronically, nightly, sometimes violently. They sweated through the sheets. They were, in the language of the new germ science, a biological hazard lying inches from your face. The sanitary movement, which we have already touched upon, transformed the cultural understanding of sleep. Patients at Trudeau's Saranac Lake Sanitarium and at the dozens of similar institutions that sprang up across Britain, Europe, and America were subjected to a rigidly prescribed sleep regime. They slept outside on open porches in temperatures that sometimes dropped below freezing. They were wrapped in furs and wool blankets, with hot water bottles at their feet and thick socks on their hands. The regimen was brutal, but it worked. The survival rates improved. This image of the consumptive sleeping alone, wrapped in blankets in cold, clean air, entered the popular consciousness. It romanticized the solitary sleep of the invalid, and it normalized the idea that clean, cold solo sleep was the ideal. The shared bed became associated with the dark, warm, contaminated atmosphere that bred disease. By the end of the 19th century, the sleeping porch had become a desirable architectural feature of the middle-class home. Architects in Britain, America, and Australia began designing houses with covered porches accessible from the main bedroom, specifically for sleeping in fresh air during the warmer months. In Australia and New Zealand, sleep-outs, small, screened, airy rooms attached to the side of the house, became a standard feature of new bungalows right through the mid-20th century. The logic was clear. The more air, the better. The more separation, the better. The more distance between sleeping bodies, the better. TB had turned the Victorian bedroom into a battlefield, and the twin bed was the trench. And class, as always, determined who could fight and who was left exposed. Consider the mathematics of mortality. In the wealthiest parishes of London in the 1880s, the annual death rate from tuberculosis might be 2 or 3 per thousand. In the poorest East End parishes, Bethnal Green, Stepney, Whitechapel, it could be 8 to 10 or even 12 per thousand, 4 or 5 times higher. The difference was not genetic, it was not predestined, it was structural, it was about housing, it was about ventilation, it was about whether you could afford to sleep alone. There is another reason for the separate bed, one that is less about germs and more about power. We cannot talk about the Victorian marriage bed without talking about the legal status of the woman lying in it. In the mid-19th century, under the legal doctrine of coverture, a woman's legal rights were subsumed by those of her husband upon marriage. The famous legal scholar William Blackstone described it thus: by marriage, the husband and wife are one person in law. That is, the very being or legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage. She ceased to exist as a person. She became, effectively, his property. Before the Married Women's Property Act of 1870, a woman did not own the money she earned with her own hands. If she worked in a factory, her husband could legally collect her wages at the gate and drink
them away. Before the 1882 Act, she did not own the jewelry around her neck or the clothes on her back. She did not own her children. In the rare event of a separation, the father had sole custody rights. He could ban her from ever seeing them again. And she certainly did not own her body. Marital rape was not a crime. It was a legal impossibility.
By saying "I do," the law argued, she had given her consent to him forever. She had no legal right to refuse him. Consider the Contagious Diseases Acts of the 1860s. These laws allowed police to arrest any woman they suspected of being a prostitute in garrison towns. She could be forced to undergo a brutal internal medical examination to check for venereal disease. If she refused, she could be imprisoned. The law viewed women's bodies as public health problems to be managed or private property to be used. In this context, the shared double bed was not necessarily a romantic nest. It was the site of her subjugation. It was the place where her lack of autonomy was most physical, most immediate. The 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act had created a civil divorce court, making it slightly easier to end a marriage. But easier is a relative term. It was still scandalously expensive, and the double standard was written into the law. A man could divorce his wife for adultery alone. A woman had to prove adultery plus cruelty or incest or desertion. So, women stayed. They lived in marriages that were often cold, sometimes abusive, frequently exhausting. In such a world, the separate bed, or better yet, the separate bedroom, became a physical manifestation of the only autonomy a woman might possess, a door she could lock, a bed that was hers alone, a space where her body belonged only to herself for 8 hours a night. Even the rise of evangelical Christianity in the 1830s inadvertently supported this separation. The evangelicals preached chastity and restraint. They viewed lust as a sin, even within marriage. Excessive sexual indulgence was seen as animalistic, a surrender to the lower passions. Therefore, sleeping apart could be framed not as a rejection of the husband, but as a spiritual virtue. A woman could argue for a separate bed using the unimpeachable language of religion and hygiene. It is for my health, dear. It is for the purity of the home. It is what Dr. Hall recommends. It was a brilliant, non-confrontational way to assert bodily autonomy. Imagine a woman in 1875. She has no vote. She has no property. She has no ability to divorce her husband. But at 10 p.m., she can retire to her own room or to her own twin bed. She can pull the covers up. She can close her eyes. And for the next 8 hours, she is free. The separate bed was a fortress. It was a boundary line drawn in a life that allowed her very few boundaries. To understand what the separate bed meant for Victorian women, we need to understand in more detail what the law said about her body, her mind, and her daily existence. The doctrine of coverture was ancient. It had its roots in Norman law, codified in the great legal commentaries of Sir William Blackstone in the 18th century. It stated simply that upon marriage, the legal identity of the wife was subsumed into that of her husband. She ceased legally to exist as an independent person. She was covered by him as a cloak covers the body, hence coverture. The practical consequences of this doctrine were staggering. A woman could not sign a contract. She could not sue or be sued in her own name. She could not make a will without her husband's consent. She could not keep her own wages. She could not own property. Anything she brought into the marriage, anything she inherited during the marriage, anything she earned, it all became legally his. The Married Women's Property Act of 1870 was the first crack in this wall. Under the 1870 Act, a married woman could keep her own wages and any property she had inherited before marriage. It sounds modest because it is modest, but it was revolutionary. For the first time in English legal history, a wife's identity was even slightly disentangled from her husband's. For the first time, she had something, a wage, a small sum, and a savings bank, that was legally, demonstrably, undeniably hers. The Married Women's Property Act of 1882 went further. Under this act, a married woman could own property in her own right. She could buy, sell, and inherit property independently. She had the same legal standing as an unmarried woman, a femme sole, in matters of property. But, and this is crucial, these acts did not change the intimate reality of the marriage. They did not give a woman the right to refuse her husband. They did not give her the right to leave a marriage without cause. They did not create any legal concept of marital rape. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 had created a civil divorce court, which was significant because previously divorce had required a private act of parliament, a process expensive and so scandalous that it was effectively available only to the very wealthy. The 1857 Act made civil divorce possible, in theory, for more people. But the conditions for divorce were grotesquely unequal. A husband could petition for divorce on the grounds of his wife's adultery. Nothing more was required. A wife, however, had to prove adultery plus at least one aggravating factor: cruelty, desertion, incest, bigamy, or rape. It was not enough for a woman to prove that her husband had been unfaithful. She had to prove he had been unfaithful and that he was violent, or that he had left her, or that he had committed an even more serious crime. Think about what this meant day to day in the Victorian household. A woman might be in a marriage that was miserable, cold, and oppressive, a marriage in which she was treated as a servant, in which her opinions were dismissed, in which her person was available to her husband whenever he chose. She could not leave without losing her children. She could not leave without financial ruin. She could not leave at all unless she could prove the aggravated circumstances required by law and could survive the social shame of a public divorce. She stayed. Most women stayed. And within the constrained space of that marriage, the bedroom, with its twin beds, its locking door, its private rituals of washing and rest, became the arena in which the smallest, most private negotiations of power were played out. Consider the experience of Millicent Garrett Fawcett, who would become the leader of the moderate suffragist movement. She married Henry Fawcett in 1867, a progressive man, a liberal MP who supported women's suffrage. Even within this relatively enlightened marriage, the laws of coverture applied. Even Millicent Fawcett had to navigate a legal system in which her identity was legally subordinate to her husband's. The progress made during her lifetime, the 1870 and 1882 Property Acts, were victories she had helped campaign for. For women in less progressive marriages, in households where the husband was not enlightened, where he was difficult or cruel or simply unthinking, the bedroom door was the last line of defense. The twin bed arrangement offered several protections. If the beds were truly separate, not a double bed with each half informally owned by one person, but two distinct pieces of furniture, then there was a physical architecture to the separation. To approach the other person's bed was to cross a threshold. To touch the other person required an act of deliberate movement across a defined gap. The geometry of the room encoded a kind of consent. And the locked door of the separate bedroom, available to the upper-middle-class wife who had her own room, was even more potent. She could, every night, at the moment of retirement, exercise the one power the law had not quite managed to take from her, the power to be alone. The domestic advice manuals of the period seem to have understood this, even if they never stated it directly. They wrote about the bedroom as the woman's domain, her space to arrange, her space to manage, with a protectiveness that suggests the authors knew what they were doing. Jane Ellen Panton, with her long chair and her bright colors, was creating a space for the wife that was distinctly and unambiguously hers. The husband might enter it, but he entered it on her terms. We must be careful, however, not to paint this as a universal experience. The story of the separate bed is fundamentally a story of money. Distance costs money. Privacy costs money. Air costs money. The aristocracy had always enjoyed the privilege of separation. In the great palaces and country estates, the concept of the shared bed was practically vulgar. The Queen herself, Victoria, though she famously shared a bed with Prince Albert and was devastated by his loss, lived in a world of separate suites. Albert had his own dressing room, his own private space. For the upper passes, sexual intimacy was often by appointment. It was an event, not a default setting. A husband might visit his wife's room, but he would return to his own to sleep. This was seen as dignified. It preserved the mystery. Even the domestic servants in these great houses often had more privacy than the working-class wives in the cities. A cook earning £25 a year might have a tiny, freezing attic room, but it was her room. She slept alone. The middle class, the striving, anxious Victorian middle class, aspired to this. They couldn't afford 2 master suites, so they bought twin beds. They bought the symbol of separation. The twin bed became a class marker. To have one was to announce to the world, or at least to your house guests, we are civilized, we are modern, we are not like the people in the slums. And what about those people? Let us look at the East End of London in the 1880s. Read the descriptions of Jacob Riis, writing of New York but applicable here, or the reports of Charles Booth. In the
tenements, the hygiene of the night was a cruel fantasy. Here, a family of 7 might live in one room. They slept on piles of rags or on a single mattress that swarmed with vermin. There was no question of vitality theft or effluvia. They were simply trying not to freeze to death. Charles Dickens in Little Dorrit, 1850s, described these areas vividly. Through the heart of the town, a deadly sewer ebbed and flowed in the place of a fine fresh river. Edwin Chadwick's 1842 report on the sanitary condition of the laboring population laid it out in stark statistics. Disease was concentrated in these overcrowded rooms. The mortality rate from TB in these districts was double, triple, quadruple that of the wealthy suburbs. Why? Because they breathed each other's air, because they couldn't separate. The separate bed was the ultimate privilege. Each step up the social ladder was marked by an increase in the distance between bodies at night, from the heap of bodies in the slum to the shared double bed of the lower middle class, to the twin beds of the professional class, to the separate rooms of the elite. To be able to say good night and retreat to your own private island of sleep was the truest mark of success in Victorian England. Let us look more closely at the world of the working poor in Victorian England, because to understand the meaning of the twin bed, we must understand the world that made it a luxury rather than a given. In 1888, the social reformer Charles Booth began his monumental survey of life and labor in London. He and his team walked the streets, spoke to residents, and mapped the city street by street according to income and living conditions. The resulting maps, color-coded by class, showed a city of vivid extremes. The grand squares of Mayfair and Belgravia were colored gold and yellow. The slums of Bethnal Green and Whitechapel were colored black, lowest class, vicious, semi-criminal. In those black streets, the domestic reality was grim beyond measure. Henry Mayhew, the journalist whose exhaustive survey, London Labour and the London Poor, documented the mid-Victorian underclass, recorded families of 6 living in a single room 12 feet by 10. They slept on straw on the floor or shared a single straw-filled mattress, or, most common, on a pile of old rags. The window, if there was one, was often sealed with cardboard or stuffed with rags because glass was expensive and heat was scarce. The effluvia that Florence Nightingale warned about was concentrated in these rooms to an almost unimaginable degree. 6 people breathing, sweating, and existing in a room with no ventilation, no running water, no drainage. The sanitary reformers who visited these areas described the smell as physically overpowering, a compound of unwashed bodies, mold, rotting food, the nearby open sewer, the effluent from the shared outdoor privy. It was not a smell that you got used to, it was a smell that you either escaped or died in. The child mortality rate in these districts was appalling. In some London parishes in the 1860s, more than half of all children born died before they reached the age of 5. The causes were multiple: diarrheal diseases, respiratory infections, typhoid, tuberculosis, but the common thread was the overcrowded, filthy, unventilated domestic space. The bedroom that middle-class reformers were managing so carefully with twin beds and open windows was for the poor a death chamber. By contrast, let us visit a country house. Let us visit, say, a large estate in Wiltshire or Herefordshire. The house has 20 or 30 bedrooms. The master and mistress have adjoining suites on the first floor, connected by a corridor and a discreet door. Each suite comprises a main bedroom, a dressing room, a bathroom, increasingly by the 1880s, and a sitting room. The suite is that person's domain, managed by their personal servant. The beds in these suites are not twin beds in the modern sense. They are each individual double beds or single beds of considerable grandeur. 4-poster beds with bed curtains or grand mahogany bedsteads with carved headboards. But they are separate. They are in separate rooms. The social ritual of visiting each other's rooms is exactly that, a ritual, a deliberate act, not a default. For guests at these country houses, separate bedrooms were provided as standard. The idea of a married couple sharing a room, let alone a bed, at a house party would have seemed slightly provincial. In the great houses, you dressed for dinner, dined, conversed, perhaps played cards or music, and then retired to your own room, independently, as individuals. It is worth noting that Queen Victoria, who in her personal life was devoted to the idea of marital intimacy, she famously shared a bed with Prince Albert, which was unusual for royalty, was in this respect something of an anomaly. She was expressing through that shared bed the depth of her personal love for Albert. When he
died in 1861 at the age of 42, reportedly from typhoid fever, Victoria's grief was so consuming that she kept his coat arranged on his side of the bed for the rest of her life. She wore mourning for 40 years. She slept beside an impression in the sheets that she refused to have smoothed away. This is one of the most poignant examples in all of Victorian history of the meaning of the shared bed, not as a health convention, not as a class statement, but as a private language of love between two people. For Victoria, the shared bed was sacred. Its emptiness was the measure of her loss. And perhaps this is the deepest truth about the Victorian separate bed. It existed in tension with another Victorian truth, which is that love, real love, the love that Victoria had for Albert, expressed itself in proximity. The separate beds in separate rooms were the rational, medical, social default, but the exceptions to this rule, the couples who chose to share or who mourned the end of that sharing, remind us that behind the sanitary recommendations and the furniture catalogs, human beings were still reaching toward each other in the dark. By the 1920s and 30s, the twin bed had conquered the world. It had moved from a medical necessity to a fashionable default.
We see this reflected in the literature and culture of the time. In Victorian novels, the marriage bed was a heavy, serious place, but by the modernist era, the twin bed was sleek, functional, and liberated. Professor Hilary Hinz notes that modernist architects like Le Corbusier and Wells Coates included twin beds in their visions of the future home. They fit the aesthetic of the machine age: clean lines, efficiency, hygiene. The twin bed was the furniture of the Jaws age. It spoke of a couple who were individuals, partners, but not dependents. This trend reached its peak in the cinema of the mid-20th century. We all know the trope: the 1950s sitcom couple, like Ricky and Lucy Ricardo, sleeping in separate beds. We have been trained to think this was censorship, the Hays Code forbidding the suggestion of sex. And while censorship was real, it is also true that millions of real couples slept exactly like that. The movies were reflecting reality as much as they were censoring it. In the classic 1945 film Brief Encounter, a masterpiece of British realism, the middle-class couple sleeps in twin beds. It isn't a statement about their lack of love, it is simply how people lived. But history is a pendulum. Just as the twin bed reached cultural saturation, the tide began to turn. By the 1950s, the medical fears that had driven the trend were vanishing. Antibiotics had tamed TB. Central heating had warmed the bedroom. The air was cleaner. Without the fear of death to prop it up, the twin bed began to look cold. A new generation of marriage experts began to argue that emotional closeness required physical closeness. The twin bed drifted from being a symbol of health to a symbol of a sexless or failing marriage. In 1956, Marie Stopes, the birth control pioneer who had once championed hygiene, turned on the twin bed. She famously called it an invention of the devil jealous of married bliss. She argued that the magnetic warmth of the shared bed was essential for a happy union. The sexual revolution of the 1960s finished the job. The double bed and the king-size bed became the site of liberation. The twin bed was relegated to the guest room or the room of the elderly. It became a relic. And yet, the pendulum is swinging again. Today we hear of sleep divorce. Surveys show that up to 26% of married couples sleep better alone. We are rediscovering the truth that the Victorians knew. Sometimes, to love someone, you need to sleep away from them. The story of twin beds in the 20th century is in many ways the story of the century itself, a story of the collision between science, sentiment, and social anxiety. In the 1920s, the twin bed was associated with a particular kind of forward-thinking, progressive couple. The new woman of the Edwardian and interwar period, educated, independent, professionally active, embraced the twin bed as an expression of individuality within marriage. It said, "We are a partnership of equals, not a merging of identities. We sleep side by side as we live side by side, together but distinct." The furniture catalogs of the 1920s and 30s reflect this. Advertisements for twin beds appeared in the pages of women's magazines alongside advertisements for labor-saving appliances and ready-made clothing. They were presented as modern, convenient, and always hygienic. The language of hygiene that had driven the Victorian campaign for the twin bed persisted, but it was now tinged with modernity and elegance rather than fear. Twin beds appeared in the architectural visions of the great modernist designers. When Le Corbusier designed his Maison Citron in 1920, one of his seminal projects, envisioning the house as
living, he included a bedroom with twin beds. When Wells Coates, the Canadian-British designer, created the famous Lawn Road Flats in Hampstead in 1934, a modernist utopia that housed at various times Agatha Christie, Henry Moore, and Walter Gropius, the master bedrooms were designed with twin beds. By the 1930s, the twin bed arrangement was commonplace in middle-class homes. Hotels standardly offered both double rooms and twin rooms, and the twin room was considered the more hygienic and more modern option. It was the twin room that business travelers and respectable married couples tended to request. The film and television industry cemented this image. The Hollywood Production Code, known as the Hays Code, which governed American film content from 1930 onwards, prohibited the depiction of married couples in a shared bed on screen. But as we have noted, this censorship found a ready cultural template in real life. The twin beds of Hollywood were not inventing a fiction, they were reflecting a reality. In I Love Lucy, broadcast from 1951 to 1957, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who were in fact actually married in real life, slept in twin beds. In Father Knows Best, in The Dick Van Dyke Show, and countless other domestic comedies of the 1950s, the respectable married couple occupied twin beds. The audience understood this not as a sign of marital trouble, but as a sign of propriety, a well-ordered, civilized household. But something was shifting.
the post-war era brought a new romanticism to the idea of marriage. The double bed was being reimagined as the ultimate symbol of intimacy, commitment, and passion. The twin bed began to feel like a remnant of Victorian prudery, something stuffy, cold, unloving. The change was not abrupt but gradual, and it was driven partly by the revolution in medicine that made the old fears obsolete. By 1950s, streptomycin and other antibiotics had transformed tuberculosis from a death sentence into a treatable disease. The sanatoriums were closing, the sleeping porches were being enclosed and turned into extra bedrooms. The open window, the separate mattress, the iron bedstead, they were becoming relics of a fearful past. In 1955, the television show The Honeymooners shocked some viewers by depicting a married couple, Jackie Gleason and Audrey Meadows, sleeping in the same bed. It felt transgressive. Within 5 years, it felt normal. By 1964, when the Munsters and other domestic comedies began showing married couples sharing beds, the change had come. The double bed had won. Marie Stopes' 1956 broadside against the twin bed, her famous declaration that it was an invention of the devil, jealous of married bliss, was less a cause of the change than a symptom of it. By 1956, the cultural mood had already turned. Stopes is articulating a sentiment that many people already felt. By the end of the 1960s, the twin bed had been relegated to the hotel room, the children's bedroom, and the sad guest room of the couple who had given up on each other. To admit that you and your spouse slept in separate beds was socially to admit that something was wrong with your marriage. The very thing that Victorian reformers had championed as the height of health and civilization was now read as a sign of emotional failure. This is one of the great ironies of social history. The pendulum had swung so completely that the meaning of the twin bed had been inverted. What had once meant modern, healthy, progressive, now meant cold, distant, unhappy. And yet, here we are in the early 21st century, and the pendulum has begun to swing again. Sleep scientists, the modern equivalent of Dr. William Whitty Hall, now tell us that co-sleeping can disrupt the sleep architecture of both partners, that snoring, different temperature preferences, and different sleep schedules are significant sources of sleep deprivation. Studies suggest that people who sleep alone report better quality sleep and better daytime functioning than those who share a bed. The sleep divorce, couples who choose to sleep in separate rooms or separate beds while remaining happily married, has become a recognized and increasingly accepted domestic arrangement. Interior design magazines run features on how to decorate 2 adjacent bedrooms for a couple. The language is different. It is about wellness and sleep hygiene and individual sleep needs, but the underlying logic would be entirely familiar to Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is this: the shared bed and the separate bed have always been in tension. We are social animals who find comfort in proximity. We are also individual biological systems with competing needs. The history of where we sleep is the history of how we negotiate those two realities, in the context of the diseases, the laws, the economics, and the social expectations of our particular moment in history. We have traveled through the fog. We have stood by the great bed of
Where and the iron cots of the TB sanatorium. We have listened to Dr. Hall warn us of vitality theft, and Florence Nightingale warn us of effluvia. What does it all mean? It means that sleep, the most private, vulnerable act of our lives, has never been just about rest. It has always been shaped by the world outside the window. It is shaped by our fears of disease, by our laws about gender, by our class anxieties, and by our technology. The Victorian woman sleeping in her separate bed was not necessarily lonely. She was not necessarily unloved. She was a survivor. She was navigating a terrifying world of germs, smog, and legal subjugation, and she found a way to claim a small rectangle of peace for herself. Let us think about what we have covered tonight and what it adds up to. We began with the simple, startling image: a married woman in a Victorian bedroom, alone in her bed, while her husband sleeps in his own bed a few feet away. We asked what this separation meant, and we found, as we so often do with history, that the answer was multiple, layered, and complicated. It meant fear. The Victorians lived in a world without antibiotics, without clean water, without modern sewage treatment. They lived with cholera and typhoid and tuberculosis as constant, intimate companions. Their fear of bad air, however scientifically confused, was a rational response to a real and deadly environment. The twin bed was, in part, a survival strategy. It meant medicine. The Victorian medical establishment, Dr. William Whitty Hall, Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson, and a generation of sanitary reformers created a scientific framework that made the separate bed not just acceptable, but obligatory for the health conscious. Florence Nightingale gave women the authority to manage their own domestic air. Robert Koch gave them a specific enemy, the tuberculosis bacillus, to fight. The bedroom became a medical space, and the twin bed was the primary instrument of its management. It meant class.
The separate bed was a luxury. It was a marker of civilization, of modernity, of education. To have a twin bed was to announce that you had read the manuals, that you understood science, that you had risen above the huddled masses sharing their bodies and their diseases in the slums. For the poor, the separate bed was an impossible dream. For the middle class, it was an aspiration. For the wealthy, it was a given. And it meant power. For the Victorian woman, subject to coverture, denied property rights, unable to refuse her husband's access to her body, unable to leave a marriage with catastrophic social and financial consequences, the separate bed was the most intimate form of resistance available to her. The language of hygiene and medicine gave her permission to claim bodily autonomy without directly confronting the structure of her marriage. She was not refusing her husband. She was protecting her health. She was following the doctor's advice. We should not romanticize this. The need to use medical language as a fig leaf for the most basic human claim, the claim to one's own body, is itself an indictment of the world that made it necessary. The Victorian woman should not have needed a doctor's pamphlet to justify sleeping alone. She should have simply had that right. But she didn't. And so she used what she had. She used the fear of effluvia. She used the fear of vitality theft. She used the fear of tuberculosis. She used Jane Ellen Panton's advice manuals and Dr. Hall's treatises. She used every available language of propriety, health, and modernity to construct piece by piece a sanctuary of her own, a bed of her own. It is worth noting that it took until 1991 for marital rape to be a crime in England and Wales, for the courts to finally rule in RVR that a husband did not have an absolute right to his wife's body. That is 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall. That is within the memory of millions of people alive today. The Victorian separate bed was a workaround for a problem that should not have existed, but within the constraints of its time, it was a small, dignified human act of self-possession. And so, as you lie in your own bed tonight, your choice, your comfort, your air, take a moment to think of that woman in 1885. The fog against the window, the distant tick of the clock, the embers dying in the grate. She turns over in her narrow iron bed. She pulls the heavy wool blanket up to her chin. She closes her eyes. She is not lonely. She is not cold. She is, in the only way that her world allowed, free. She claimed her own air. She claimed her own space. She claimed her own night. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, whether you are alone or beside someone, take a moment to appreciate the safety and sovereignty of your rest. You do not fear the night air. You do not fear the smell of the river. You have rights over your own body that generations of women before you had to fight, inch by inch, through property laws and
suffrage movements and courtrooms to secure. The choice to share a bed or not to share a bed is now yours to make. It is a luxury they never had. And in that freedom, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable, there is an entire history. Thank you for spending these hours with us in the past. If this journey has brought you some peace, some insight, or simply a comfortable heaviness behind the eyes, please subscribe to History for Sleep. Leave a comment below. We would love to know what corner of history you would like to visit next. Sleep well, sleep safely, and sleep, if you wish, entirely alone. May your air be clean, may your sheets be warm, and may your sleep be your own. Good night.